To Ethiopia now. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, is faulting Ethiopia's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau's final report into the fatal March 2019 crash of a 737 MAX. Now, the EAIB released its findings in December. At the time, it blamed an electrical malfunction for pitching the nose of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft up, and from which, of course, the pilots were unable to recover. But in their report, U.S. safety experts say they found no evidence to support the electrical problem line of thinking. Instead, they say that the faulty data that was coming through from the angle of attack sensor and then triggering MCAS to push the nose of the aircraft down, they say that that was caused by a separation of, quote, the angle of attack sensor vane due to impact with a foreign object, most likely a bird, end of quote. Now, the Safety Board has also raised questions around the performance of the flight crew. The MAX crashes in 2018 and 2019 in Indonesia and Ethiopia led to a 20-month grounding of this particular aircraft. Boeing incurred losses of more than $20 billion in losses over that period of time. All right, then a bit more analysis on that particular response from the NTSB. The global chairman of the Fairfax Africa Fund, Zemedeneh Negatu, now joins us with more details on this particular story. So, Zemedeneh, one of the complaints from the NTSB is that they say they did not get to review and then issue comments on the final report before it was issued. What's normal procedure in an event like this?
Right. Rama, as always, thank you very much for having me back on your program. Actually, I liked your intro because it pretty much covers what needs to be said. But since you specifically asked about what are the normal procedures, I can tell you I've talked to people who are very closely involved in the investigation and also in writing the reports. So I can state accurately that the NTSB actually throughout the entire process was involved. They actually were being provided routinely draft reports, not only the final, but the draft reports as it's being drafted. So the statement by the NTSB is not accurate. As I said, I have verified this with those who are intimately involved in the process. Now, the standard procedure in compliance with ICAO requirements, which requires that the host, the manufacturing country, which is in this case the United States, therefore the NTSB, BEA, which is the French entity, which is also because France, the CFM engines came from France, and also because the Ethiopian authorities had hired the BEA experts to help out with this investigation. So all three of them were intimately involved, and they were even, as I said, provided drafts, not just the final. So it is not accurate for the NTSB to have stated that they were not provided with the report.
Indeed. So the report also wanted to make some arguments, and I could be wrong here because it seemed like a red herring. The NTSB chairman, I believe, was quoted saying that, the report, quote, did not really delve into flight crew performance issues and whether they were adequately prepared. But, this is 2023. We know now that the MCAS system was improperly designed, improperly coded, improperly approved, and it was barely even explained to pilots. And that came through from congressional hearings in the United States. So this isn't really a legitimate argument, is it? It's just a red herring.
Absolutely. Absolutely a red herring. I mean, Boeing, by its own, I guess, admission, by all the investigations we've had in the United States, by the United States Congress, and regulators around the world found that the airline, the MCAS, was faulty by design. So if you produced a faulty aircraft, how could you even bring up the subject of the pilot's performance? I mean, it was from the start, this aircraft should never have been allowed to be certified and fly. Now, let me add something interesting though. The pilot who was flying that aircraft on that day was the lead pilot who was training other Ethiopian Airlines pilots to update them from all the directives or notices that Boeing was sending to all airlines around the world after the Lion Air crash. So he wasn't just a regular pilot, actually. He was leading the training, the updating of the Ethiopian Airlines pilots. So he was very familiar with all the notices that Boeing had already sent. But this is even subordinated to the bigger picture, which the aircraft should never have been certified. The MCAS was faulty by design. And as you said in your intro, Boeing already has incurred $20 billion of losses. The CEO of Boeing was fired, and all kinds of implications came Boeing's way over 2.5 years. It's only now, even the last, I think, airlines in China that started flying the 737 just recently. So that by itself, I think, as you said, it's a red herring. It should never have been included in the NTSB's report.
Indeed, and just to give our viewers a bit more context, if you look at that Senate report, there's an interesting little segment that actually deals with a response, a training scenario for pilots to respond to a nosedive in the aircraft, on the older aircraft, the 737NGs. And the assumption that Boeing had made was that pilots would be able to respond to that sort of crisis in 4 seconds. Investigations later proved that by their own metrics, pilots would actually only respond in roughly like a minute or thereabouts. One last question for you, Zemedeneh, though, before we go. NTSB, they also disputed findings around this erroneous data that was being fed from the angle of attack sensor into the MCAS system. According to the Ethiopian Aircraft Investigation Unit, they say that's linked to electrical problems. The NTSB is saying that's not supported by evidence. But what's their evidence to prove this bird strike theory?
I'm glad you asked me. First of all, NTSB was involved, as I said earlier, in the investigation. They were on the field. They found absolutely no evidence whatsoever that there was an FOB, which is a foreign object like a bird strike. None whatsoever. Second, with regards to the electrical malfunction or sending errors, that actually was included in the first 737 crash, the Lion Air. If you read that report, it actually clearly states electrical erroneous errors were being sent, which essentially caused a lot of the complications. So it's not unreasonable to conclude, lacking any other evidence, that this could also have had an implication. So it's not something that came out of nowhere. The Lion Air report, please, I ask you viewers to read it, experts in aviation to read it. It still clearly stated the electrical component angle of it. And secondly, there was nothing found on the ground that shows a foreign object like a bird strike caused the problem. So the NTSB, again, on this one, was not stating the facts as they should be.
Indeed, and Boeing itself will actually be in court, I believe a court in Texas later on tomorrow in a federal lawsuit. Zemedeneh Negatu from Fairfax Capital, thank you very much for your time.